Good morning, guys. Today I will be painting the painter style reference photo that we had from a couple weeks ago. I'm going to include the reference photo here. I just love this photo, the clouds and everything. You can see it preserves the light and has a beautiful cloudy sky. So I'm going to get the paper all wet with a thin layer of water. You do not want any puddles on the piece on the paper, but you want it to be thoroughly wet all the way to the edges and the corners. Here I'm going to show you, you want that nice sheen of water on it, so it's fully wet, fully saturated, but you do not want puddles of water. And so I'm going to start with a lavender color, and I'm going to paint that background color of the sky. I like to do my sky in layers because I find that it prevents the colors from bleeding together. And so you see that lavender color there at the top, and also through the clouded portion here. So I'm going to paint the lavender portion on here and doing just soft strokes. The paint, you want it to be a medium mixture, not too wet. You do not want it to be dripping, but you also don't want it to be too thick. Now I'm going to use my Naples red on here, and I'm going to use it to paint through those areas where it has the light there behind the clouds. And again, I'm doing this in layers. So I did the lavender and this yellow. I think it's Naples yellow red. On this portion, and I'm preventing it from, I'm doing it in separate areas so that it does not blend together and become one color. And then I'm going to let this dry. You want to use soft brush strokes throughout this whole portion. Here I'm also using this beautiful violet color. I kind of like that pinky purple that they have in the sky. So I'm painting that on both sides here of that main portion of the clouds at the top. This is all using wet on wet method, and it's going to help you create that soft clouded look, and you do not want any hard lines. If your paper at this point starts to dry, you want to be sure to go ahead and stop painting. Let the layer completely dry before you finish with your cloud. That will avoid any harsh lines or any blooms that you don't intend. So I'm going to continue to add. I like to use this bigger brush to add the violet color. It gives a wider cloud look to this area. I'm adding some more lavender in this area, and then I'm going back through with a clean wet brush, and I'm smoothing out all those clouded areas. So you want to pick your brush based on the side of the cloud that you see, size of the cloud. You want to use a thicker brush, like a broader round brush, to paint these broader sections of clouds, and you can use your more narrow brush to do that yellow portion or the lavender throughout the middle portion of clouds. And then I go back through with a clean, wet, damp brush. You don't want it to be dripping, or else it's going to create some water lines, and you can smooth in that beautiful color throughout your cloud. So here I'm painting the top portion of clouds again. You can see in the reference photo, it kind of has that pinky purple at the bottom, and then it goes through has a darker area of sky at the top. And so when you're painting clouds, it's really important to look at your photo and to see what your clouds are doing. On the reference photo, you can kind of see the structure of the cloud, and then when you paint your cloud, you want to follow that structure. So where's the lighter portion of the cloud? Where's the darker portion of the cloud? And then match your paint application to match that shadow and the light and dark portions of your clouds in your reference photo. So here I'm adding some more darker clouds. This is an indigo that I'm using here with this violet color, and you see that I apply a thicker mixture of that indigo on the cloud, and then I go back with a damp brush and I smooth that in. I don't want it to have an abrupt stop to the cloud portion. I want it to be smooth into the sky. That's based on what you can see on the reference photo. And you can see here, what I like to do is to get a clean damp brush as I rinse off my brush, and then I pull it out, and with my fingers I pull off the water so it's not dripping onto my paper, because if you have drips of water under your paper, it can create an interesting texture. But if you don't want that texture there, you want to avoid the drips, and you don't want that water to cause your color to spread all over the place. Here I'm using that violet color again to paint some of those smaller clouds. I'm using a smaller brush, and I'm adding this again on a wet and wet method. Both the darker portion of clouds at the top and this section, this is on the second layer. I let the first layer fully dry, and then I wet the whole paper again, and now I'm using is on a wet the wet paper, I am adding the paint again. This is the wet on wet method on the second layer. And you can see again, I'm using my hand to pull off those water droplets off the brush. So it's clean and wet, but it's not dripping and it's not gonna bleed all over the place. So this is one of my favorite methods to do for clouds, to create those really nice soft clouds. I'm going to continue to add some darker clouds here with this bigger brush. This creates a softer cloud look. When you have a smaller paintbrush, it's going to kind of create more that more vivid color, more vibrant color. But when I want a softer cloud, kind of a lighter cloud color, I'm going to use the bigger brush. And then again, I'm going to go back and with my clean brush, smooth that into the background, either smooth it, blend it into the violet color that's right next to it in the cloud, or blend it into the sky background. And so I really like how this is going. I did this way, 2 layers, because I wanted to preserve that yellow color that's in the background. If you do both the yellow and these darker violet and indigo colors, they're going to blend into each other. You're not going to be able to preserve it's going to be more difficult to preserve that light yellow color, but then also the white color around those clouds that you want to preserve to make this look just really dramatic like it is in the reference photo. I just love the way the sky has turned out. And so we're going to smooth out just a couple places here and the sky is finished. Now we're going to move on to the bottom portion of this landscape. This is a beautiful winter landscape, and this painting is all about preserving that snowy scene that we see. And so there's going to be a couple of techniques that I'll be able to show you that can help you achieve that look where it looks like not only can you add drama and texture to your painting, but you can also preserve that snowy look that's there. So the first thing that I notice when I look at this reference is just this tree line that goes all the way across that is going to separate the sky portion from the bottom lands, from the foreground portion. And so I am using my Moon Glow from Daniel Smith, and I am doing a pretty thick mixture at the top of the paint with a little bit of water, and I'm just doing kind of an uneven tree line all down that the first half of the left side of this painting. I want to make it look like a tree line. The biggest thing in nature that you want to try to achieve when you're doing a painting, and this is something I had to practice for many months over time. One thing we have to keep in mind is that nature is spontaneous and that is not perfect and it's not going to be the same all the way across. And so when we paint our tree line, we want to make the shape of the trees kind of uneven, not the same. You want to make the shape of the trees different. You also want to alternate the thickness of your paint hues. So you want to have some darker trees in one location and then some lighter trees in another, because you want that spontaneous look that we actually see in nature. And you can see here along my tree line, I'm going to paint with a thicker mixture at the top, the tree line, but then I use a damp brush, a wet brush, not dripping, and I'm going to smooth that tree line into the bottom, smooth it down into my landscape, into my foreground. You want to have that really soft look, that kind of misty look at the bottom. It's going to help achieve that snowy look that you're looking for, but then also this kind of a sunset or sunrise painting. You're going to want that misty look. So you want to smooth down the paint into the bottom of the painting to achieve that look here. I'm going to continue on here making the tree line. You want the tree line to reach all the way across your paper. And again, we're going to variate the size and the shape of those trees, making the pine trees more dense in one area and more loose in another. And I'm going to use that Moon Glow underneath, and I'm going to add some of that paint on using a wet on wet method, making a misty background here and achieving that effect. Now I'm going through my painting here and I'm adding some pine trees in some different areas. I'm going to continue to do this throughout the rest of the painting, adding pine trees here and there. I'm mostly using the Daniel Smith Moon Glow here. I really like the granulation that paint achieves. So I'm adding them here where I feel like they should be. I do look at the reference photo here and compare to that, but also at this point, this is becoming your painting. So look at your painting. Where do you think some trees need to be? And so I continue to add trees using this really loose, I love this brush. I got it in Thailand. It was a $2 brush at a cheap art store, but it's just one of my favorite brushes now. And then I go back through with a damp brush underneath each of those trees that I've added, and I'm going to use that damp brush to smooth the paint into the back of the paper, making a smooth effect at the bottom, creating a kind of a more misty, snowy effect. Now I'm going to start adding some larger pine trees that are here. I'm going to do this a couple different times, so I'll describe it a couple different ways, and hopefully you can see it when we repeat it here. So you'll see that I'm adding the paint and I'm skipping down kind of those boughs of the tree. I'm not making a solid tree. I'm leaving space in between. And then I'm using a damp brush and I'm going across the top of each tree branch to use that wet paintbrush to smoothen the top portion of the tree branch into the background of the painting. This is going to create a snowy effect. It's going to kind of look like that snow is laying on the top of the branches of the tree. And so I'm going to do this a couple different times. I will describe it to you again so you can practice it yourself. Continue to add different trees in different locations. Now I'm using a thicker mixture of the paint to add more texture, and you want those trees in the background to look lighter, and some of those trees in the foreground, when they're darker, they're going to look closer to the person who's looking at the scene. Now I'm going to add some lavender here. This is going to be an area that's going to be closer to that cabin. As you can see in the painting, that it's going to kind of have some shadow in this area, so I like using lavender. It has a neat granulation effect, and it's also going to make a lighter shadow in this area. Here I'm painting a tree again. You can see more clearly here that I'm skipping down, painting the branches as I go down, using that moon glow. And then here in a minute, I'm going to take my damp brush, and it cannot be dripping. You see damp, and I'm going to go along the top edge of each of those branches, and that's going to cause the top edge of that paint to blend up into that water, creating a soft, snowy look on the top of the tree. And so I would practice this a few times before you paint it on your paper. But if you're like me, I don't really like to practice before I just like to paint scenes and landscapes. And so feel free to just keep painting this across the page. And here I'm going to do another tree just the same way. And the goal here, you want to create those branches in a random pattern. You don't want them to look exactly the same on both sides. You don't want them to just look like you're filling in a tree. You want it to be a random pattern because everything in nature, like we talked about, it doesn't look perfect. It looks very random and sporadic, but that's what makes it beautiful, and your mind sees it as beautiful. So here I'm painting those snowy trees again. I'm continuing to add both some lavender and a very watery mixture of that moon glow here. This is going to create a background for my cabin and kind of create that nice shadowy kind of, snowy landscape look that you're looking for here. I'm going to start working on this cabin. I use a very watery mixture of lavender. I'm going to paint the side edge, that left edge, and that top edge of the lavender, and then I use a damp brush to go back and smooth that lavender into the roof. I use a very light version of the moon glow to paint the bottom edge of that roof line to create a shadow there. As you paint, always take a few minutes to step back and look at your painting, just kind of survey what you're doing. You want to make sure that as you add the trees and as you add the shadows, does it make sense to you? It's good to copy, to go off of what your reference photo is, but you want to be able to really go to learn to create that artist instinct and to look back and look at your painting. Where do you need trees? Where do you need more snow? Where do you need more shadow? And to go with your artistic ability that you're developing with each painting that you paint. You're developing your artistic ability and instinct. And this is a lot of this, especially these trees and the clouds too, a lot of it becomes muscle memory. Once you paint a lot of these, it's kind of your hand and your artistic mind. You start to know what to do and you start to feel where these places are where these trees are supposed to go and where the paint is supposed to go. So don't despair if this just doesn't feel like it's coming naturally. The first couple of times you paint a landscape like this, keep doing it. Repetition really builds up that artistic muscle, that artistic ability that you have, and you can develop even more over time. Here I'm showing you the watercolor brush. You want this to be damp, but what I use is my fingers and I pull off the excess water. I like to feel my paint and to feel the brush, and so when I use my hands to do that, it helps me to feel how much water is on that brush. And then I go, and again, I'm smoothing this along the top edge of the branch that I've painted so that the top edge of that paint can blend up into the water and create that snowy effect on my pine tree. I'm going to keep adding pine trees, keep adding branches. I'm going to keep smoothing it into the background here. I like, in the reference photo it doesn't show it, but I like to keep this area really misty and soft. I kind of imagine some smoke coming up from that cabin there. And so I painted the pine trees around it, but then wanted to make a really soft edge to those pine trees as if a smoke from the fireplace is coming up. It just made it feel more cozy to me. And so I'm continuing to add branches and to blend that into the background here, and to continue to create texture and depth in this area of the painting. You'll see me periodically using the tips of my finger to kind of dab. And here you can see the tree I'm showing you close up. You can see the dark branches, but then also that blend into the water, the water that I added at the top edge, making that snowy look. Here on the right side of the cabin, there was an area with some light shadow here, and so I used lavender, and I wanted this to be distinctive from the foreground where we're going to have that icy lake, and to show the shadow areas. This is going to be under the pine trees that I'm about to paint. It also is not part of that ice, that frozen lake that's in the front, so you want a clear color difference in this area. I'm also using some of that lavender to create some shadows there in front of the cabin. You see the light there. I used my Naples yellow red to create that light in that from the cabin, but then I used some lavender there on the foreground in front of the cabin to create kind of that look where maybe the shadow is from the door frame or from the light frame. Here on that right side, it's got even darker shadow, so I used a watery mixture of my moon glow there, and then blended it really well into that mountainside. I'm going to keep adding pine trees. Again, I'm looking at my reference, but I'm also looking at my painting. Where do these trees need to go? Where does the space look empty? Where do I need small trees? Where do I need some bigger trees? And then how snowy do I want those trees to look? So the more space that you leave in between your branches, the more snow seems to be on the tree. And then the closer the branches are together, that would make it look like less snow. Always at the bottom of your tree, use a damp, clean brush and smooth that paint into the background so that it will create that misty look. Creating some smaller trees here at the foreground, at the front of this mountain. I thought these were just so cute, and yeah, that made me really happy to put these trees here at the front. I am speeding up this portion of the video a little bit more. There's just so many trees in this reference, and so I really got lost in creating so many of these beautiful snowy pine trees, and I really had fun with it. It was very calming, and it took me quite a while, so I'm going to speed this portion up a little bit. You can slow it down if you want to, and you can follow along with each and every tree, but I really encourage you to don't just place them exactly where I did. You look at your painting, you look at your reference, you use your colors, and try to imagine where you think these trees should go, and then paint accordingly. That's going to help building your artistic muscles and your artistic memory. And as you create with each painting, you're going to be able to learn more and more. And what do you like, and how do you like the placement, and how do you like your paintings to look? Do you want more contrast or less contrast? You want it to look softer or have different colors? It's all up to you as the artist. Now we're going to paint the rest of this cabin. I'm using a thicker mixture of my Moon Glow from Daniel Smith. I am painting around that beautiful window that I have where that light is streaming out. I use my favorite little brush from Thailand to make some really clean, straight edges here. You want a brush that's going to have a nice point on it when you paint this. And you want a brush that's going to be able to hold paint and not run out before you have to, and keep having to load up every swipe. So I'm going to be able to leave that window with that beautiful yellow pouring through, And then here on the side, there's also some tree stumps that I'm going to paint. I use this Moon Glow and I paint across the bottom edge of that mountain. I want to create kind of that color variation, distinct separation between where the mountain ends and where that frozen lake begins. So I paint a small line just kind of randomly across the bottom of that, and then I'm using my clean wet brush to blend that in to the bottom. I want that paint to bleed down to kind of create kind of a shadowy look, to create a really soft look as if it's the edge of the frozen lake that's starting there. I'm using my lavender here to create soft lines in the lake on that ice. And I love the way this lavender, this is by Van Gogh. This is one of my favorite colors. I use it in a lot of my paintings. And I'm using that to add texture to the ice. I'm also using the Moon Glow here to create some more definition in this lake. Now I'm going to work on the portion of this lake where there's going to be that frozen and the cracks there in the front. So I use Moon Glow to darken this area. I'm using a wet on wet method, Moon Glow and lavender. I am going to show you, I actually had trouble with this part. I tried to find saran wrap and I was out. I couldn't find it. So I tried to use tinfoil. Tinfoil is not the same. It did not achieve the same effect. And so I did not like what it looked like. So I'm going to do something different. I am adding this little gift card, like a credit card, and I'm adding my Moon Glow. So instead of using it with the saran wrap, I am now just using this edge, kind of like a straight knife, and I am kind of rubbing that. See how the neat texture that creates? It's not just a straight line or a solid line like you would have with your paintbrush. It's creating this kind of scattered, random, kind of, it feels scratchy. I don't know, when I look at this whenever after I finish this part, it just looks scratchy on the paper, and so I'm making those little cracks in the ice, and so this is really fun. I had fun with this. I use my Moon Glow here to create these cracks in the ice. I think you could use a lot of different colors. You do indigo or maybe a Payne's gray, different things like that. But I added just those cracks. Again, I just tried to practice using my artistic instinct. Where did I think those lines needed to go? I didn't copy exactly what was in the reference photo, but I really enjoyed making this portion of the painting my own, even after I failed finding saran wrap and failed trying to find an alternative. Saran wrap is not made the same in all countries, so this was really fun with this card. I'm using my clean, damp paintbrush now, and I am going along the bottom edge of each of these cracks, or some of the cracks, and I wanted to soften that bottom edge and make them blend into the ice. I thought that created a really neat effect here. It just made it seem more, I don't know, watery and soft to go along with our landscape that we've created. And I kept going, and then I added some smaller cracks using my paintbrush here, and kind of blend. I liked how the paint, when I used the damp brush, it would smooth, it would blend into the water, but then I could carry that lighter color through the ice and continue the ice crack further using that lighter color. And I just really liked how that looked. Here I'm going to define the edge of this frozen portion of the lake where these cracks are. Most of this area is still wet, and so I'm using a wet on wet method. I am painting a very light version of this Moon Glow. I think there's some lavender in here as well, along the top edge of where that area is wet. And so it's going to create a line at the top edge of the ice, but then it's going to blend down into the ice and make that soft gradation there. But I wanted to define the area where we had this frozen lake, but then also the area where it was I think this area is where it's cracking and it's warmer here and melting a little bit. And so I really liked how that looked. Here I'm also just adding some other little cracks and some other little details using my really fine 0 round brush that I found here on Amazon, and I love using this one. Just add those cracks and add those lines wherever you feel like they need to be. And then proudly, when you're done with all of this, proudly sign it. It is your art. You've worked so hard, and be really proud of what you've accomplished with this painting. And now my favorite part, we get to remove the tape and we get to see our beautiful painting with that really nice white border. If you've chosen to add the masking tape around the outside. And we're going to take that all the way off. Be careful not to tear your paper after you've made your beautiful masterpiece. And we're going to get all this tape off and take a look at our final piece. There you have it, guys. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please share your work. I would love to see it. Find me on Facebook or Instagram.